Hello, the fourth task in this sliding blocks project is to get the blocks to move smoothly from place to place. Only one block should be able to move at a time, so if the player clicks quickly on a bunch of blocks, they should all just wait their turn. So to implement this, I'm going to go into the block script, and I'm going to create a coroutine. So I'll write I in numerator, and I'll call this something like animate move. And it's going to take in a vector2 for the target position, and a float for the duration of the movement. I'll then start by recording the initial position in a vector2. So I'll set this equal to transform.position, and also create a float percent starting at 0, and it's just how far into the movement we are. So at 1 the movement will be complete. I'll just say while percent is less than 1, I can increase percent by time.delta time divided by the duration. Alright, it's then as simple as saying transform.position is equal to vector2.lerp between the initial position and the target position with the percent as our value there. And then we can just say yield return null so that it waits a frame between each iteration of the while loop. Alright, we now just need a way to conveniently call this from the puzzle class. So I'll just make a public void called move2position, taking in vector2 target position and also float duration. And this will just say start coroutine, animate move, pass in the target and duration parameters. Okay, so I'll save that, go into the puzzle script, and now instead of setting the block to move's position directly, I'll just say block to move dot move to position, passing in the target position and a duration. I'll just say 0.3 maybe. Okay, let me save that and give it a quick try. So these are now all moving smoothly, but of course if I click on a bunch of these in rapid succession, you can see them overlapping because they're all trying to move at once. So let me go into the script, and up at the top here I'm going to create a queue of type block, which I'll call my inputs, and then I'm going to just cut all of this stuff out of the player move block input method and replace that with inputs.enqueue block to move, so just adding that block to move to the end of the queue. And then I'll make a new method called simply move block, taking in block to move, and I'll paste in that movement code. Okay, now obviously need to know when a block is finished moving. So in the block script, I'm going to just copy this on block pressed event and rename this on finished moving. I'll take out the block parameter there, since I don't really need that. And when the animate move coroutine is finished running, I'll just say if the onFinished moving event is not equal to null, then I will invoke it. Back in the puzzle script, can then have a method, which I'll call simply onBlockFinishedMoving. And up here, I'll subscribe it to the block.onFinishedMoving event by saying plus equals onBlockFinishedMoving. Okay, so now I want a bool to keep track of whether or not there is a block that's currently in movement. So block is moving, and whenever we move a block, I'll set that to true. And when this method is called, I'll set block is moving back to false. When the current block is finished moving, I'll want to see if there are any blocks waiting to be moved in the input queue. So I can say move block, passing in the next item in the queue, so inputs.dq. But of course, inputs could be empty, and also the next item in the queue could be an illegal move, in which case it won't actually move the block, of course. So I'll put this in a while loop, saying while inputs.count is greater than 0, and while no block is moving. So now if this is empty, then it obviously won't be called, and as soon as a block is successfully set in motion, then the while loop will also terminate. Now, this is all good, but of course, if there's no block currently moving when the player clicks on a block, then this code here will never actually get called. So I'm going to put this in a method of its own. I'll just cut that out there and make a method called makeNextPlayerMove. Paste that in. And so in this player input method, you can immediately try to make the next player move. And when the block is finished moving, we can also try and make the next player move. Okay, last thing that I need to remember to do is just to actually initialize this inputs queue, which I'll do at the bottom of the createPuzzle method. Just set this equal to a new queue. Alright, I'm going to go into Unity, press play, and we should see that if I click on these rapidly, they all wait their turn to be moved. I should definitely turn down the move duration a little bit, but it's basically looking good. Okay, task 5 is about shuffling the puzzle, so you should be able to say how many moves you want the shuffle to take, and then press some sort of input, say the spacebar, and it should do its thing. Alright, so in order to shuffle the blocks, I'm going to need a reference to them. So let me create a two-dimensional block array, which I'll just call blocks, and I'll initialize that over here. Blocks is equal to a new block array with size blocks per line by blocks per line. And then I'll just add each one to the array after I've initialized it. So blocks with an index of x, y is equal to this new block. Okay, I'm then going to have a method called makeNextShuffleMove. And in here I just want to pick a block that is above, below, or to the left or right of the empty block and try and move that. So I'm going to start by creating a vector2 int array called offsets, and I'll just initialize this with a new vector2 int 1, 0, so that's to the right. And then let me just copy this and paste it 3 times. So I can then have -1, 0 for left, 0, 1 for above, and 0, -1 for below. I'll then create int random index is equal to random.range between 0 and the number of elements in the offsets array. I'll now use this random index to get the offset that I want from the offsets array, so offsets with an index of random index. And then I can say that the coordinate of the block that I want to move, so move block coordinate, is equal to empty block.coordinate plus the offset. Now, of course, this move block coordinate might be out of bounds. For example, if the empty block is at the top edge of the puzzle and we try get the block above that. So let's do a check. If move block coordinate.x is greater than or equal to 0 and move block coordinate.x is less than a number of blocks per line, then we're okay on the x-axis, and we just need to do the same check on the y-axis. Move block coordinate.y greater than or equal to 0, and move block coordinate.y less than blocks per line. Okay, so if that bounds check succeeds, I'll call move block and pass in the block with an index of move coordinate.x, move coordinate.y. If the move block coordinate is out of bounds, however, I don't want to just give up, but rather keep trying until I find an offset that works. So I'm going to put this code inside of a for loop, going from I equals 0 to I less than offsets.length. So let me paste that in here. And for the index, I'm going to say random index plus I, and I don't want that to go out of bounds, so I'll just loop that around by saying mod offsets.length. As soon as I've moved a block, though, I want to break out of this loop, so I'll just add break. Okay, let me go up to the top and create a public int. I'll call this shuffle length. set that equal to, say, 20 by default. I'll also need an in somewhere to keep track of the number of shuffle moves remaining. So let me make shuffle moves remaining. And then I'm just going to start shuffling when the spacebar is pressed. So I'll create an update method here and say if input.getKeyDown keycode.spacebar. Then I'll call a start shuffle method, which I'll create somewhere down here. Void start shuffle, and this will just say shuffle moves remaining is equal to the defined shuffle length, and then make next shuffle move. After this initial call, I'll want subsequent calls to be made from the onBlockFinishedMoving method. So here I'll just say if the number of shuffle moves remaining is greater than 0, then I'll make the next shuffle move. And inside here, when I move a block, I'll say shuffle moves remaining gets decreased by 1. All right, let me save and see how that's looking. So I'll press spacebar, and I see that it's not getting very far before stalling. So the reason for that is that it's referencing these blocks at a certain coordinate, but when I move the blocks, their positions in the array aren't being updated. So let me go to the moveBlock method, and here I just want to say blocks with an index of block2move.coord.x by block2move.coord.y is equal to the empty block, and then blocks with an index of emptyblock.coordinate.x and emptyblock.coordinate.y is equal to the block2move. So just swap their positions in the array. Okay, should have more success this time. So I'll press spacebar, and it's shuffling nicely, but the one kind of silly looking thing is when they shuffle back and forth. Preferably that would never happen. So let me create a vector2int up here, and I'm going to call this the previous shuffle offset. And now in the make next shuffle move method, when I get my offset, I'll say if this offset is not equal to the previous offset multiplied by -1, because obviously having moved, the block will now be on the other side. Only in that case will I move that block, and then when moving a block, I'll just set previous shuffle offset equal to the offset. All right, another thing I quickly want to adjust is the speed of the block movement. So I'm going to have here public float, which I'll call default move duration, set that equal to maybe 0.2. But then I'd also like to define an even shorter duration to use when it's shuffling, so that you don't have to wait so long for it to finish. So I'll create a public float shuffle move duration, set that equal to maybe 0.1. And now I'll have the moveBlock method take in a float duration, and it will pass in that duration over here. And now when I'm calling moveBlock from the makeNextPlayerMove method, I'll pass in the default move duration, but from the shuffle move method, I'll of course pass in the shuffle move duration instead. Okay, so if I save that, press play, I can get this shuffling, and that looks good. Now, I don't want to allow players to click on blocks while the shuffling is going on, because that could seriously screw things up. So I'm quickly going to make a enum, which I'll call the puzzle state. And the puzzle can be in one of 3 states. It's solved, or it's shuffling, or the player is busy working on it, in which case I'll just call it in play. All right, I'll then have a puzzle state variable called state, and this will default to the first value in the enum, so it will be solved from the outset. Now, I think I'm only going to allow a shuffle to begin when the puzzle is solved. So I'll say if state is equal to puzzle state dot solved, and obviously the space key is pressed. Then in the input method, I'll just make sure that the state is equal to puzzle state dot inplay in order for the input to be accepted, and should take this into account in the onBlock finished moving method as well. So only make next player move if state is equal to state.inplay, and only need to worry about shuffling if the state is equal to puzzle state.shuffling. And if shuffle moves remaining is no longer greater than 0, then we're obviously leaving the shuffle state and transitioning to the in play state. Alright, last thing I need to do is just say inside the start shuffle method, state is now equal to puzzle state dot shuffling. Okay, we can now move on to task 6, which is the final task, and here the goal is just to get the hidden block to reveal itself once the player completes the puzzle. Okay, I want an easy way of checking if a block is at its starting coordinate, so I'm going to go into the block class and create a vector to int starting coordinate, and in the initialization method I'll say this dot starting coordinate is equal to the given starting coordinate, and then I can have a public method returning a bool called something like is at starting coordinate, and this will just return whether or not the current coordinate is equal to the starting coordinate. Okay, so going into the puzzle script, I can somewhere have a method check if solved. In here I'll simply loop through all of the blocks, so for each block in the blocks array, if any of the blocks is not at its starting coordinate, so if not block dot is at starting coordinate, then obviously the puzzle isn't solved, so I'll just return from the method. But if I get through all of the blocks without returning, then the puzzle is solved, so I'll set state equal to puzzle state dot solved, and I'll reveal the missing piece with empty block dot gameObject dot set active true. Okay, now if the player shuffles again, then I want the empty block to once again be hidden. So in the start shuffle method, I'll just say empty block dot gameObject dot set active false. And since I'm hiding it in there, I'm no longer going to hide it in the create puzzle method, so I'll just remove that line there. The only thing left to do now is to call the check if solved method whenever a block finishes moving. So I'll come down here and just say check if solved. Alright, so let me save that and test this out. So I'll give this a shuffle, and I'll speed up the video while I solve this, but once the last piece falls into place, we should see the missing piece revealed. One final detail is that if I actually build this project, you can see all of the blocks come up pink. And the reason for that is that in the block script, I am setting the shader over here using shader.find unlit texture, but Unity is not seeing that shader being used anywhere in the project, and it's currently not smart enough to look for references to shader.find in the scripts. So to save space, it's leaving that shader file out of the final build, which is why the materials are coming up pink. So I'm going to work around this by creating a resources folder, and as you may know, everything inside the resources folder will be included, regardless of whether or not it's actually used in the project. So here I can create a material, just call this my block material, and I'll set that to a shader of unlit texture. And this will now work fine because Unity is forced to include this unlit texture shader in the final build because the block material references it. Now, it does feel kind of weird just having this block material and it not being used, so even though this isn't entirely necessary, I'm going to replace the shader.find with resources.load, and I'm going to load a material with the name of block. Alright, I'll save that, and the project is now complete. So I hope you've enjoyed this little programming practice series, and until next time, cheers.